Hello Aqua friends. Today we are going to do a turkey. I am showing you this video from my base coat that I have on there already. So as you see, I started off with a really good sketch and always starting from light to dark, laying down your first set of colors, which I already did. I'll tell you right now, another of my favorite colors, the one that I'm using now, is Quinacridone Scarlet. So I'm going over those areas on his head with this Quinacridone Scarlet. I apologize for the quality of the video. It is a 2-year-old video, and I had a lot of mistakes in my video making beginnings, but I had to start somewhere, so. So I'm basically taking a very small detail brush and I'm drawing in those textured lines that I see. While it's wet, I'm dropping in more of the Quinacridone Scarlet, as well as I used Quinacridone Red. For the fleshy part under his beak, I also used a little bit of Scarlet Lake, because it's a little bit on the warmer side. He's got this very cool orange eye. And so I'm putting in my first coat of paint on his eye. He's got some really nice reflections in there. So I'm adding shadows underneath the feathers and kind of drawing in, and then with a wet brush going over those areas and adding in the lines. As you can see in the reference photo, some of those feathers are really defined. Okay, so getting right into that eye, I'm adding more of the shadows around. He's got a nice reflection above the eye. So notice the little crinkles around the eye, the skin, adding in those flesh tones. It just really made that eye pop. Putting in the pupil, and he's really starting to come together. I'm working on the beak, and I'm getting in those darkest darks around his mouth. All those little lines. Putting in the shadows on his nose. So I'm pretty much working wet on dry, and using this very small detail brush, I could really get in there and get all those lines that I see. And as you see, it just really makes this very realistic effect, putting in all those shadows. So this is what it looks like at this stage. Now I am taking paint off using a scrubber brush to get the texture of like those highlighted bubbles on his skin. So I just keep wetting that hard brush that I have. It's like this really round stubby brush, and just keep having it damp, scrubbing an area and picking it up with your paper towel. And see how all those little nodules just pop up? It really gives it a three-dimensional look. Going back and adding in these very, very fine lines, this all his little whiskers on his head and beak. And then wherever I feel like I need touch-ups or more pop of color, getting in those grooves more, darkening that up with my Quinacridone Scarlet. I'm putting back in some of the pops of color. And then just dragging that pigment and making all those little lines that I see in the photo. To get like that texture that's on his skin. And I really zoomed in to my reference photo to see what exactly the texture was and how I could mimic it. So a lot of painting is just preparing and looking at your reference photo before you even start doing anything, and figuring out in your mind how you're going to go about painting the subject. And sometimes it's trial and error. If I'm too excited and I don't take the time to try something out that I think is going to work out on a scrap piece of paper, sometimes I try it on exactly what I'm painting, and and it doesn't come out. I have to scrub it out right away, lift off the paint, and then kind of stop and think about what my next step is going to be. So this part of his neck is really interesting because he's got these bright pinks on top of almost like a really kind of sky bluish, a little bit on the turquoise side, skin underneath. The whole head and neck was, well, I want to say it was probably the most time-consuming part, but all the feathers and plumage, it took a lot of layers of paint as well. I think I probably spent about 3 hours on doing this turkey. I wet it first and then dropped it in, so it's a nice soft fuzzy blending look. And all these tiny lines, I'm using my detail brush and drawing in all these like little tiny blue lines. So that's why it took me so long. It's the more detail that you're going to put in a painting, the longer it's going to take. But I also think at least it's rewarding to me to have that level of detail. So now I'm starting on his feathers, and I'm basically going over my pencil lines and drawing in those groups of feathers. It's quite dark in this area, so I'm using a very dark Van Dyke brown. And basically, I'm just mimicking the shapes. It's kind of like doing tiles. And it kind of lightens up, so you notice how I varied my color. It's not as dark now. Some are very defined, some are not so defined. And that section in there is very contrasting. So I have to add a lot of those dark tones between the feather scales. Just using a script liner brush, I'm getting in more of the feather tiles, but a lot lighter. And I'm going over the areas that are darker, right around where the pink flesh meets all his feathers. So as an underpainting for the feathers, I used some Quinacridone red, some Van Dyke brown, and burnt sienna. The greens, I mixed some like sap green with a little bit of indigo, mixing also with the browns to have a very, you know, cohesive appearance, so that I'm still bringing in the browns into those green feathers, because there are still a lot of warm tones in them. So this area is wet, a little bit wet, and I'm going over and adding all those darker areas. The feathers aren't as defined in this section. Kind of working wet on wet so that my brush strokes are a lot fuzzier and blend in more. So now I'm using a flat brush and I'm adding in the colors to the ends of these feathers. I'm just trying to get that texture that I'm seeing in the reference photo, all these little lines. Softening up those harder edges too, because my brush is a little wet. So always towards the end of my painting, like this is getting to be pretty close to the end, but it's always an adjustment of your values, and I'm trying to get my darks as dark as they need to be, making sure my highlights are as light as they need to be, because that tonal contrast is what's going to really make the painting look very beautiful. Glazing over a few areas with some more warmer colors. Adding some final glazes to get those areas nice and dark. Also adding some more glazes, soft colors to the feathers. And that is it, folks. This is the final product of the turkey. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and let me know what you think in the comments below. See you next week. Thanks for watching.